I said, has Starmer got cheese in his ears? And Ellie from Swindon says, good morning, Dr. David. No, Starmer doesn't have cheese in his ears. He has the whole cheddar gorge in them. Great show as always. Thanks, Ellie, for that. Good morning, David. This is Peter. So this is Pandora's box. I will only support young Spanish people being allowed to come here freely if people of my age can go back to living in Spain on their pensions. You see, it's drip, drip, isn't it? Back into freedom of movement. I just want to get out of this country and away from this awful government. I think most of us feel exactly the same way, Peter. Thank you for that. It's the worst thing that Starmer could have done. What a betrayal to the British people. This is really quite scary. What is Starmer doing to our country? He is ruining the UK more and more. Sharon in Staffordshire. Well, Nigel Farage, as you can imagine, has been fast out of the traps this morning. He warns Keir Starmer he will face the wrath of voters in traditional Labour heartlands if he delivers an abject surrender to the European Union. So Nigel went further. He said, actually, the Prime Minister thinks he is going to get away with this surrender deal, but he underestimates how strong the Brexit feeling is in the Red Wall. The whole reset is an abject surrender from Starmer and politically something he will come to reject. Now, And now I regret, I was up in the Red Wall recently. We saw what happened in Runcorn. People are very passionate about Brexit. They want control of this country back. They want to feel that we actually have sovereignty, that we can do our own trade deals. Look at India. That actually, the majority of it, is a good trade deal. The United States, another trade deal. What on earth are we doing cozying up to Europe, which is a declining market at the best of times?
I think the Labour Party have always failed to grapple with the idea that, I've always sort of put it as, we have like a metaphysical cap in this country. There's a point where the people of this country feel that there's too much migration, and it's no exact figure, it's a movable level, but there comes a point.
It's a feeling.
It's a sort of an indication rather than anything tangible. And the problem with having been in the European Union is that was always being breached by EU migration, which meant that our ability as people who were working in government or working in politics to then negotiate with the likes of India or with the likes of Pakistan or the United States, where visas were a part of what they wanted every single time, was significantly reduced. So our ability to trade with countries was reduced because we couldn't negotiate in the ways we wanted to. The Labour Party have never really accepted that the vote in 2016 was a vote about migration in a really, really big way. And that...
What do they think it was about?
I think they felt it was about the more domestic issues of left behind places, and there was an element of that for sure, but actually this was about the collision of migration that was felt to be too high and left behind places, and Labour failing to recognise one half of that means that they're always going to have a problem with that.
But they're intricately related.
They are, absolutely.
And that is what I heard in Runcorn. So in Runcorn, people said to me, we are ignored, abandoned by the metropolitan elite in London. We can't cope with the amount of immigration that is happening here. We have no say over what is going on. We used to be a proud industrial town. We no longer are. And you mentioned the Islingtonian elite here in London. They can't see this and can't hear that message for some reason. Why is that?
I don't know. And I think some of this goes back to a WhatsApp group of friends of mine and I were discussing this speech earlier this week, the Theresa May speech on citizens of nowhere.
Yes.
In sort of in conjunction with this island of strangers idea that Keir Starmer was putting forward earlier. The citizens of nowhere thing was about a concept that you as an individual felt yourself above all nation states and that you could sort of bounce around as you felt like, and therefore never attached yourself to your own country, and therefore were citizens of nowhere rather than citizens of the world. And that mentality clouding how we did immigration, because Islingtonians were running immigration under the Labour government for so long, under Blair and Brown, is what created the beginnings of this issue. And I think that we still have an issue with that in relation to that metropolitan section of the Labour Party, where they can't understand why standing on someone's doorstep and having them tell you my country doesn't feel like my country anymore is a perfectly legitimate thing for that person to say. They feel like anybody saying that is automatically a fascist, automatically somebody to be deriled. And I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing for a voter to stand on a doorstep and say, my country doesn't feel like my country anymore.
You see, it's one thing to be in the European Union and to have a chair at the table to make the decisions that then apply to this country.
Which, of course, we aren't going to have under
Which we're not going to have. And this is that's the point I'm going to make, which which is actually, under this scheme, we are going to abide by EU rules, but will be unable to change said rules.
Which is, of course, exactly what the Labour Party were warning against as part of the Conservative Party negotiating to leave the European Union. Is, well, we're not going to have a seat at the table. And the sort of the harder Brexit we ended up with at the end, which wasn't hard enough and wasn't soft enough for any, and sort of shittied about in the middle. This was what Labour were warning about, and they have walked us right into it. And I think that's got to be in order to be able to say further down the line they want us to go back in fully.
So let's have a look at the latest poll. I mentioned this yesterday. This is the Find Out Now poll, voting intention. This is before Keir Starmer decided on his new policy. I mean, this is pretty out there just in terms of those numbers. So we've got Reform UK on 33%, Labour on 21%, Conservatives 16%, Lib Dems on 14%, and Greens on 11%. Now, there was an extrapolation done of that, which actually, when you then try and look at how many parliamentary seats each of those get, I don't know if you can see this yet. So there's another slide which shows you the numbers of seats. Let me just tell you what they are before they come up. I'm just trying to read that from here. But yes, you can see Reform UK, 390 parliamentary seats, Labour 72, Tories 18, Lib Dems 80. This is before Starmer says we're going to allow everyone into this country. We abide by the ECJ. We do all the things that actually you voted against because I'm not listening. What will happen to those polls?
I can't see them getting much better for Labour while people in this country continue to feel as poor as they do and continue to feel as unlistened to. My party appears to not be doing very well out of all of this.
Why?
I think we haven't been forgiven for a lot of what went on in 14 years.
Well, you allowed lots of people into the country. Not you, but your party.
My party absolutely did allow a lot of people into the country who should not have been allowed into the country, and it was very, very foolish. But we also didn't do enough economically to make sure that people were doing well at the end of 14 years of Conservative government. And, you know, the people who got richer were already rich, and people were not getting much better off in middle parts of the country despite having voted for us in order to do that. We still had industrial decline in many ways that hadn't been stemmed. And, you know, there are a lot of missed opportunities we had over 14 years.
So...
And we have yet to be forgiven for that. We may never be forgiven for that.
I'm glad you said that.
Well, it's the realpolitik of the situation. Anybody looking at...
But so many Tories don't agree with you.
Well... I'm not. I have the benefit of not being elected to anything.
Well, that is
so
true.
I can say I don't have to.
But you see, I was with Robert Jenrick the other day for the election, actually, and he just disagreed with me. I said, actually, I think you face an existential threat to the Conservative Party.
Well, I believe he has to publicly disagree with you.
Well, of course he does.
Yes.
This was privately.
Well, that's still because you're now saying it publicly on the air. Of course,
well,
it was.
Oh, yes, a good point.
I'm not sure it really ever was private, but I think I'm in a position where I am able to say, look, I think that we haven't been forgiven. There's a possibility that we won't be forgiven. I don't know that the current leadership is doing enough to move us in the right direction. But we do have some very difficult elections coming up in May next year, in Wales in particular. Wales is my
Scotland.
Wales is my political background.
Yes. You see, Wales is going to be interesting.
Wales is going to be,
and I can see it already changing seismically.
Wales has been ignored by both ends of the governance of the M4 for 25 years, and educational outcomes are down, health outcomes are down, economic outcomes are down, and the end result is going to be a polarisation in political opinion. So you've got Plaid Cymru doing quite well over and above what the actual sentiment for independence is. You've got Reform doing quite well over and above what the actual sentiment for example, abolishing Welsh devolution is. You have this pull towards the extremes because the more traditional parties have basically been ignoring Wales, and that's just unacceptable for a large chunk of the country.
Can I just pick you up on one thing there about devolution? Do you think there is a movement to get to basically dissolve devolution?
Yes, there is. And what's interesting is when we did
growing pace?
When we did the polling around the Silk Commission in about 2013, which was one of the devolution commissions under David Cameron, independence and abolition tracked each other and were at 9%. When I sat on the Independent Commission on the Future of the Constitution of Wales 2 years ago, we polled again, and we did bookended polling. It was about a decade later, and they were both at 16%. So they were tracking each other, which is more of an indication of a departure to the extremes than it is about sentiment rising and being identical in both camps, because it does track with a movement away from the more traditional parties. It doesn't necessarily mean that abolition will happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that independence will happen, but both are in theory viable options.
And do you think abolition should happen?
I think that there's a very serious question about whether or not the Welsh government has achieved really anything of long-term value.
Just stop there. Anything.
In the last 25 years. But I also fully believe that every time we talk about returning money to Westminster and saying Welsh taxpayers will get a better deal, historically English taxpayers have gotten a better deal out of money coming back to London.
But you see, I could argue that for East Anglia, for example, because East Anglia doesn't have devolution itself. And I think many people in England think it's deeply unfair. It is.
And what's interesting is if you look at Wales gives us tangible evidence of this because of the nature of devolution. So at the moment, Wales is about 5-ish% of the population, about 8-ish% of the geography, which in transportation terms is incredibly important.
Yes, of course.
Transport infrastructure is not devolved, rail infrastructure is not devolved to the Welsh Government. The Transport Department only spend 2.5% of the rail infrastructure budget in Wales. So Welsh taxpayers are being underfunded.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So we have a tangible example of Welsh taxpayer money going into London and then not being recycled out because the Treasury refuses to Barnetise itself within the areas that it has its own expenditure over. And every single example of those, and there are many, gives confidence to the independence movement, gives confidence to the people who just don't like how Wales is being governed, saying, well, hang on a minute, our trains don't work. There's huge parts of Wales that aren't covered by trains. How is it that so much more infrastructure like HS2 is going into England and we see no benefit from that, and we don't even get a Barnett consequential for it, even though it goes into Wales not at all? They have a right to be quite upset by how the status quo has managed Wales in the last 25 years, and the polling is what we're seeing the result of.
Absolutely fascinating. Lauren is one of the most intelligent and eloquent guests ever to appear on Talk.
Oh, that's very nice.
That's Ralph in Liverpool.
Oh, thank you.
That's lovely, isn't it? Right, let's pause for a minute. I want to know your thoughts, please, on Keir Starmer cozying up with the EU. Is Labour betraying Brexit? Is this the end of Brexit? And actually, it's worse than that, because if he aligns himself with the European Union, but we have no say and we have no chair at the table, so therefore we can't influence policy, that is actually worse than being part of the European Union. What are your thoughts on that this morning and the closer ties with the EU that he's going to sign off tomorrow? The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222 and messages on X as well at Talk TV. After the break, I'm going to be talking about Ed Miliband. He's worried about Reform UK too. He's now talking about axing pylons. Now that could be a win. This is Weekend Breakfast.